5. Insane Serial Arsonists. For most, a fire means danger, but for deranged arsonists, it signals excitement and even arousal. They get off on seeing the bright flickering flame engulf an object or home, and the 5 people on this list took this to the extremes. Here are 5 insane serial arsonists. Number 5. Raymond Oyler. California is known to have many wildfires, but certain ones are caused by deranged individuals who get a kick out of setting sparks in real life. Such was the case on October 26, 2006. Dubbed as the Esperanza Fire, the first signs were reported at 1:11 a.m. at the intersection of Bonita Avenue and Elm Street in Cabazon, California. Because of the Santa Ana winds and the dry and flammable brush, the fire spread quickly before firefighters could contain it. With the chaparral biome nearby, it also helped spread the fire faster. Within 18 hours, the blaze had consumed 24,000 acres. Firefighters scrambled to save the nearby homes and buildings. By the end of it, 5 firefighters died as the wind shifted and blew the fire towards them. The Esperanza fire consumed 40,200 acres in total before it was eventually contained. It damaged houses, outbuildings, and a portion of State Route 243 at an estimated cost of $9 million. It was also thought to be one of the worst fires caused by an arsonist ever. Soon after, a huge manhunt was on and a reward of up to $600,000 was offered for anyone who could provide information, leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible. 5 days later, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department arrested Raymond Oyler. Oyler was a mechanic from Beaumont. His obsession with fires started young, and soon small fires he was setting wasn't enough. He dreamt about and soon became obsessed with lighting an entire mountain up. He would often use a combination of cigarettes, a pack of matches, and even a slingshot to help start the fires in places he couldn't easily reach. For the Esperanza fire, Oyler attached a pack of cigarettes to a pack of matches. He lit the cigarettes, then left them in a galley by some brush on Esperanza Avenue. After the fire, officers were already looking at Oyler as a possible suspect because he had caused smaller fires earlier that summer. When they found the cigarettes used to light the flame, it contained Oyler's DNA, and he was arrested. Robert was sent to trial where the jury found him guilty. The judge then sentenced him to death, stating Oyler, as a serial arsonist, had set out to create havoc. Aside from the 20 counts of arson, he was convicted with 5 counts of first-degree murder for the death of the firefighters and 17 counts of using an incendiary device. He's currently still on death row and is campaigning for his freedom. Number 4. Peter Dinsdale. Born to a prostitute, Peter Dinsdale, also known as Bruce George Peter Lee, grew up in a children's home. He suffered from epilepsy and was born with a congenital defect, causing him to walk with a limp and his right arm permanently across his chest. As he grew older, he became a laborer, and in 1979, when his mother remarried, he took up his stepfather's last name, Lee. He also changed his first name to pay homage to his idol, Bruce Lee. The first of his string of crimes began on December 4, 1979. A fire broke out on Selby Street, Hull, just east of Yorkshire. It was the home of Edith Hasty. While the Hasties were a large family, that night only Edith was at home with her 4 sons. As they slept, someone poured paraffin on the outside of the house and started a blaze. The family woke up to a raging inferno. Charles managed to push his mother out the window. Thomas also managed to get out. But Charles, who was 15, along with 12-year-old Paul and 8-year-old Peter, suffered severe burns after becoming trapped inside. They would later die, one by one, days after the fire. Despite the horrific casualties, police were shocked at the cold response by the neighbors. Apparently, the Hasties were hated, and many wished bad things on them. Eventually, police soon got an anonymous call from someone who said he saw 3 people driving away from the house that night using a Rover 2000 car. Police found the vehicle and questioned 3 possible suspects. They began putting on the pressure, hoping at least one would crack and confess, and soon one of them did, and it was Lee. He started off by saying he didn't mean to kill them. He was upset at Charles Hasty for demanding money after performing some sexual activities on him. What's more, he was mad at the family for ridiculing him when he professed his love for Angelina Hasty. He said this was the reason he set the home on fire. This was enough information for police to arrest him, but to the officer's shock, Lee had more to say. He went on to confess that burning the Hasty home wasn't his first crime. In fact, he had started 9 more fatal fires in Hull in the last 7 years. None of the fires were thought to be arson, and in total, they killed 26 people. Police were skeptical of Lee's claims, thinking he was fantasizing about them, but when they drove him around town, he pointed out one by one each location he claimed to have set fire to. Sure enough, the homes or places had a record of being burned. When asked why he did it, Lee said he loved fires and said he didn't think anyone would get hurt because of them. He eventually pled guilty to 26 counts of manslaughter instead of murder under the grounds of diminished responsibility. He was sent to jail for life. His case, despite being brutal, was overshadowed by the case of Peter Sutcliffe, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, so it never received the notoriety it should have. Number 3. Thomas Sweatt. While walking home in the early morning of January 11, 1985, then 30-year-old Thomas Sweatt from Washington, D.C., saw a well-dressed, attractive-looking man walking on the opposite side of the street. He then followed him back to his home and watched him enter. Afterward, he went home himself, borrowed his sister's car, and headed back out to the unknown stranger's home. Along the way, he picked up an empty 2-liter soda bottle, filled it up with gasoline, and brought that along with a towel. Once at the home, he took the gasoline and poured it on the front porch, then lit the towel, immediately setting the front hallway on fire. Panic broke out in the home as fire engulfed it. The man, Roy Pickock, escaped through a window and suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his body. As he stood in the front yard screaming for help, he was saying that his wife and children were still inside. Sweatt drove by the burning home, just watching the chaos. The fire killed Pickock's wife, Bessie. It also eventually killed Roy, who died 2 months later as a result of the burns he suffered. His son and daughter were in the home and survived the blaze. Officially, fire investigators said the cause was a carelessly lit cigarette left behind on the 2nd floor bedroom. It was a dubious pronouncement, as no one in the home even smoked. It would take years and more than 100 fires later before Sweatt would eventually confess to the crime. Sweatt's arson crimes would go unchecked for decades. A rash of fires swept through Washington, D.C. and Prince George's County, Maryland in 2003. In June of 2003, a large fire took the life of 83-year-old Lou Jones from Avart Street. During the investigation, forensics proved an arsonist was behind it. That same night, 2.5 miles away, another fire burned the RFK Stadium, and it was done by the same perpetrator. By this time, officers from different states had already compared notes and knew there was an arsonist setting fires around the 2 states, but Sweatt was eluding capture even though he was risky and careless. For example, one time he sat in a house he was intending to set fire to for so long that the owners caught him on their front porch. For months, even when police learned of an arsonist deliberately setting fires, all they had was DNA evidence but no suspect. They picked up clues here and there, including narrowing down the area where Sweatt frequented or purchased his supplies. It wasn't until December 5, 2004 when police caught a break after a house fire in Arlington. In the debris left behind, forensic specialists found a Marine Corps cap and dress pants. DNA was obtained from the dress pants, and it matched that of the other fires. This was the first time police realized their arsonist could have been a veteran. While the Marines didn't have a DNA profile database, they did have barrack-related fires. And in one instance, a car leaving the scene of a crime was traced back to Thomas Sweatt. So on April 27, 2005, Sweatt was finally arrested. Investigators would note that instead of guilt and shame, he was relieved when he was finally apprehended. For once, he could talk freely about the secret he had kept for so many years. Within 2 weeks, he signed a secret plea deal, admitting to guilt in the murder of not only Lou Jones but also Annie Brown in a February 2002 fire. Police had not known of this one. Later on, Sweatt admitted to almost 400 fires, and police managed to close about 353 cases. He was sent to a maximum security prison in Terre Haute, where he's sentenced to serve 2 life sentences. Number 2. Paul Keller. Ever since he was young, Paul Keller from Linwood, Washington, had shown a fascination with fires. At 9 years old, he burned down a vacant house next door. Aside from that, Keller was also extremely hyperactive as a kid, even receiving medication for it at one point. By the late 80s, he ended up working at Everett Firm as a bookkeeper, but he was fired when his desk mysteriously went up in flames. So he started working for his father, who owned an ad agency, but Paul's life soon went into turmoil. He went through a bitter divorce, then ended up filing for bankruptcy. He then started abusing drugs and alcohol. In 1992, mysterious fires began to break out in several counties in Washington. Firefighters desperately tried to control the blazes, with as many as a dozen breaking out in one night. Various churches were burned, houses, stores, and other structures. The fires would erupt with no accelerants, and they were all started at chest level, meaning the arsonist simply reached into the home and ignited a flammable item he found. The perpetrator would strike early in the morning or hours after the stores had closed. In 1993, the arsonist torched the Four Freedoms retirement home in North Seattle. The elderly facility was filled with over 400 senior patients. Many managed to get out, except for 3 older women who died of smoke inhalation. The arsonist remained free and police were baffled. People were anxious, wondering if their county home or office would be hit next. Then a woman told police about an unusual man she bumped into who actually talked about setting the fires. Police were desperate and asked the witness to undergo forensic hypnosis, hoping she could recall helpful details about the possible suspect. She managed to remember his vehicle and also described him as thin, wearing glasses and having a mustache. He seemed neat, wearing an Oxford shirt, but was intoxicated. A sketch artist was brought in, and soon a possible suspect's face was shown in the papers. George Keller, Paul's father, immediately suspected the arsonist could be his son. George traced Paul's whereabouts and found out the counties he traveled to were among those where fires had occurred. Aside from that, he knew all too well Paul's violent childhood history. George Keller made the tough decision and told police about his suspicions. Days later, Paul was arrested. His father, George, was waiting for him at the police station and told him, "It's over, son." Paul initially denied starting the fires until fire investigators praised him for his work. Then, he willingly and gladly admitted to everything. He even went on a ride-along, pointing out how he had started certain fires and offering more details. Paul Keller was sentenced to 99 years in prison for starting over 70 fires. As for his family, despite doing the right thing, they were shunned by the community and suffered plenty of losses for the next 2 years that Paul's case was highlighted. They lost their home, their business, suffered mental and physical health problems, but eventually they were able to overcome it. Number 1. John Pillow Pyro Orr. It was October 10, 1984, when a major shopping plaza, Ol's Home Center in South Pasadena, was gutted by fire. During the blaze, 4 people were killed, including a 2-year-old. The next day, when investigators came in, they proclaimed the cause was faulty wiring. But fire investigator John Orr insisted it was arson. Orr initially wanted to be a police officer, but he failed the entrance exams, so he decided to become a fire investigator instead. He was odd, but admired for his diligence. and even went on to become chief arson investigator for the Glendale Fire Department in Southern California. Over the next decade, it was him who continued to set fires without anyone knowing. His favorite places to burn were homes and portions of forests. He often used this technique to lure away firefighters. He would set a remote patch on fire to draw out firefighters so he could set fire to big stores, which he really enjoyed lighting up. One of his favorite shops were home and bedding stores, and this gained him the nickname Pillow Pyro. In 1987, right after a conference of fire investigators in Fresno, California, an unusual amount of fires began to erupt around the city during and after the meeting. These were all set in Bakersfield. One drugstore in Fresno caught fire, followed by a fabric shop across the street. In a nearby town, Tulare, both a fabric shop and drugstore was engulfed in flames. Then in Bakersfield, a craft shop displaying dried flowers was also set on fire. During the investigation, fire investigators found one thing in common: an incendiary device composed of filter-tipped cigarettes with matches, all tied together using a rubber band. The Bakersfield Fire Department Chief, Captain Marvin Casey, listed down potential suspects, thinking the fires were started by an expert arson investigator from Los Angeles. In March of 1989, there was another conference for fire investigators in Pacific Grove, California. By comparing the attendees, Casey created a short list of possible suspects. Among them was John Orr. By 1990 and 1991, several arson fires broke out in Southern California, and this time it was the LA metropolitan area. A large task force was created to hunt down the culprit. The head of the Pillow Pyro Task Force, Tom Campuzano, distributed flyers to fellow fire investigators about the modus operandi of the arsonists they were after. Casey was at this meeting and told him of his suspicion that it could be a fire investigator. He also handed in a partial fingerprint they obtained from one of their fires. Using better technology in Los Angeles, it was matched to Orr. For months, Orr was put on surveillance, and on December 4th, he was finally arrested. In 1992, he was found guilty of 3 counts of arson and sentenced to 30 years. Then on June 25th, 1998, a jury in California State Court found him guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder for the fire in a hardware store, along with 24 other indictments. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years without any chance of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at the California State Prison, Centinela. So there were 5 insane serial arsonists. These fire starters didn't just like fire, they were obsessed with setting things ablaze. So much so they didn't care how much damage each fire incurred or whether there would be lives lost. Luckily, they were able to be caught. If you enjoyed watching this video, then please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We have new videos every Wednesday and Saturday that we know you want to check out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.